Hi guys, welcome to the Werewolf Project, which is part of the Horror Bound in Red segment. And today we're going to talk about I Killed the Werewolf for My Summer Vacation, which is written by Sam Whittaker. I read it on Kindle. It is available Kindle Unlimited, Kindle, and paperback, of course, if you're interested. So, I Killed the Werewolf for My Summer Vacation follows Alan Deshawn. He is a 10-year-old boy in Wyoming, Michigan, and you're in his head. He's the main character. Now, you figure the title like that and being in the head of a 10-year-old boy for a good portion of the book, that you're looking at a book that's aimed at YA, your younger readers, but I want to tell you right up front, you're not. It is not that at all. And I think Whittaker does a good job of putting yourself in the mind of a 10-year-old boy without feeling like you're in the head of a child, and without also feeling like you're hearing a grown man try to imitate a 10-year-old child. I think he did a good job walking that edge. I think he did a really good job as far as making you not feel like you were in a child's head or an adult's head, letting the character speak for itself, and you could feel comfortable in his skin. So Alan and his best friend Brad were attached at the hips. They were that powerful, young, best friends connected, very, very much bonded with each other. And this takes place in the 80s, just so you know. And Alan and Brad, doing everything together, going to the movies together, doing sleepovers, all the normal 80s kids stuff. They spent a lot of time hanging out in the woods near the house. This is Wyoming, Michigan's like a middle-sized town on the edge of some woods, and you also get a very good feel for the town as the story unfolds. Alan and Brad are out playing in the woods when something begins stalking them. They're a little wary and think they notice something, but nothing, they're in the woods, could have been animals, could be anything. So they go about their day being 10-year-old kids. And they separate and go home. And that night, while they're in bed, Brad gets taken by the werewolf. He's pulled out of his second-story window and dragged off. And the scene is fairly horrendous. This is what I'm saying. This is not a YA. This is not a kid's book. It is a full-on gross werewolf book with, the full effects of the attack being laid out before you. So if you're squeamish, you know that going in because it's all there. Now, Alan goes about his day, doesn't know what's happened, and he finds out not that something happened to his best friend, but that he's basically not allowed to see his best friend. It's not being explained to him. He doesn't know what's going on. So you're in the head of this very frustrated child who just wants to be able to hang out with his best friend and doesn't know what's going on. He's being lied to by the parents. Nobody's talking about what actually happened. There's a lot of excuses being made without him ever finding out what's going on. So you spend a lot of time in Alan's head where he's feeling that frustration and feeling upset that he can't see his best friend. And then when he eventually finds out that he's been killed, you spend a lot of time in his head where he processes his grief and wants to find out what's going on and doesn't understand. And that's a pretty effective. That's the beginning of the book. That's like the first half of the book. You're dealing with a lot of emotions from the initial attack before things begin to ramp up and the werewolf becomes more active. Now, but stop there and address the fact that the most important thing about a werewolf book is the werewolf. Now, obviously, there's no special effects or anything to look at while you're reading, so it's probably the description and the attacks and things you want to know about. And this is actually a very unique take on a werewolf, and I was very unsure about it. I didn't know how to feel about it because this werewolf isn't like a mindless beast. It felt more cruel. It didn't feel like an animal. It felt more like a serial killer. When you got to be in the head of the werewolf, you felt more like you were in the head of a serial killer who was playing with his prey. He was having fun. He was enjoying the kill. He looked forward to the kill and very much did get something extremely pleasurable out of the experience, more than just like a mindless beast killing out of instinct. And when he killed, he did it for food as well. So there are descriptions of his eating the bodies and of that sort of thing. So it is a fairly brutal werewolf take. And a lot of people, when you read the werewolf, you want the the werewolf books, you want the gore, the attacks. That's what you are interested in. This one was a little bit hard because the first victim is a child, and he does seem to target younger people. And like I said, he does when you're in his head, it is a little rough. He's very, like I said, he's very cruel. He's not a mindless beast. He has a lot of his faculties about him, and he comes across as very much a predator, similar to a human versus an animal. But his attacks are definitely extremely animalistic. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm just giving you a heads up because I through the first half of the book, I wasn't exactly sure how I felt. I know I wasn't disliking the book, but I was unsure of it because it was a little bit different in a lot of ways. And being in the head of a child and seeing it made me uncomfortable in certain ways because of the fact that Whittaker did a good job writing it. You felt some of of Alan's pain and desperation and longing for his best friend, and that I think that's a compliment in all honesty. And sure, if you're emotionally sensitive, you're probably not reading werewolf books anyway, because a good werewolf book is fairly brutal. But if this is something you're interested in, then I don't think it'll bother you enough to make you want to stop. It might get in your head a little bit and make you think, which it did with me. Understanding it's fiction is very important when you're reading, so I didn't take it too seriously. But like I said, it's a compliment to Whittaker's writing that he was able to put me in the emotions of this child and how he felt and his desperation and sadness and terror. Alan as a main character is a good point of view character, especially for the way this story unfolded. And as much as it might bother you, I don't think there's really another way that you could have told this, especially knowing what I know when the book finished. And then in the second half of the book, you have Alan meeting Leland. Leland has been off in a distance watching him. He's noticed him kind of like stalking him. And Leland makes contact and lets Alan know that he knows what happened to his friend. He knows what's going on, and he wants to help him. Of course, Alan's not going to trust him completely. Now, I said this takes place in the 80s, and you have this almost be that kind of kids on bikes book, but you're looking at it being Alan is kind of all by himself. And being the 80s, he didn't have the internet, he didn't have any of that. He had to do his research the old-fashioned way. So you have him going to the library, picking out books, studying, learning what he can from the resources he has available. He starts working with Leland a little bit to try and figure out what's going on, and then the parents kind of get involved. There is an aspect where they find out what is happening, and some of them are trying to help. And this builds to a kind of climax where you have the parents kind of taking over. Now, Alan being a 10-year-old kid, they're obviously not going to want to bring him along and put him in danger. And how they get him involved in the finale, I think, was done well as well. So when the book ends, you realize there's an epilogue, and everything isn't quite as it seems. Now, this is the first book in a series. And in the series, the best of my knowledge, seems to follow Alan as he grows up and the experiences he has with other creatures. There's not just werewolves, there's vampires and witches and all kinds of things in this series. Like I said, this does make it sound like a young adult series. But I think what Sam Whittaker did here was take the idea, the childhood fascination trope of this kind of series, this almost YA goosebumpy kind of child fighting off monsters, and turned it into an adult story. And I kind of appreciated that because some of that stuff is fun and it just isn't done in a way that I enjoy most of the time. He took that concept and adulted it up, if that's a word. It's not a word, right? But in any case, he made it more mature, and it had the childlike innocence of like a Goosebumps type storyline of the a series, but without making you feel dumbed down, without making you feel like you're reading a kid's book. I think he really did a good job, and as hit and miss as werewolf books can be, I really kind of enjoyed this one. I was kind of iffy in the first half, maybe because of the emotional play of it, and I wasn't sure where they were going, and I was a little thrown by how vicious the werewolf was, how humanly predator he was versus beastly and animalistic. It took me a minute to adjust to that, and I think was Whittaker was trying to do, using that YA tropey kind of idea of a an extended battle against different monsters over several books. He wanted to make sure it didn't feel that way, so he did make some of the themes and some of the attacks very adult, very mature, very vivid. So there was no mistaking the fact that he was not writing a childlike novel, a YA novel, despite the fun title and the young protagonist in this book. So overall, I say if you're looking for a werewolf book, this is available on Kindle Unlimited and Kindle as well as on paper. You could do worse. And if you're into other monsters, I haven't read the other books, but I think that as enjoyable as this book actually was, that it'd be a good series to continue if you're open to other monsters. Like I said, it sounds a little silly in that when you say it like that, but the epilogue makes it make sense. And there's some things along the way that you can see there's something else going on, and so it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like he's like, oh, monster of the week, let's do the next thing. It feels like there is a story, a much deeper, much bigger story buried in there. So I didn't feel cheap. It didn't feel cheap that the story is going to continue out, that there are other monsters, and it very easily could have. So I got to give Sam Whittaker a little bit of credit, because he did make it feel like it was worth the ride, and that if you went on to continue the series, that you probably weren't going to be eye rolling at the concept. So in any case, there we go. That is I Killed the Werewolf for My Summer Vacation by Sam Whittaker, the first part in a series that does have a definitive ending. If you're interested in just reading that book, it has an ending. You can be done with it. It's got a good mystery where you have to figure out who the werewolf is. It has a very werewolf-like character in the attack sense, but it has taken an alternate take from what I'm used to anyway, on the mindset of the beast. And overall, not a bad book. Very, it did feel like there was some 80s influence, and that's always good for me. I enjoy that. I did have a good time with it, so I would recommend you check it out if you're into werewolf books. If you're not overly sensitive to the emotional aspects of it, or some pretty grisly attacks. There isn't a lot. There's just, it's just a few. Most of it's a psychological and character-driven story where you're trying to figure out what's happening, like I said, a mystery, and you're inside the child's head as he goes through the trauma of losing his friend. But the attacks in there are, if you're into the brutal attacks, I think you'll be very satisfied with that. So anyway, there we go. That's I Killed the Werewolf for My Summer Vacation by Sam Whittaker, and thank you for listening. Sorry it was so late. I am way behind on videos. I'm very aware. So in any case, thank you. Please subscribe. Remember, the secret is Zen. Read books, pet werewolves, listen to metal, and thank you for being here. I'll see you soon.